City Council meeting. Let's see here. Thank you. We're going to start with an invocation and then move to our pledge. And here to do our prayer today is Alexandra Perez from Pray the City. Thank you, Alexandra, for being with us.
Is this on? Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, gotcha.
Please join me in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we ask that your presence just be in this place, Lord. Father, right now we know that your promise is to prosper us, to give us hope in a future. And we know that's what it is for your city, Lord. So, Father, right now I'm praying that you give us the wisdom, understanding, and knowledge to make the choices that we need to make, Lord, to be able to go forth and with your promise for us, Lord. Father, I pray for each and every person here, Lord. I'm praying for peace to just fall on them right now, Father. And Father, I'm asking that you help us to speak with love and kindness today, Lord. We thank you for all that you are, for all that you do, Lord, and for all that you're going to do in our city, Father. We trust you, Lord. And I just pray over these members here, Lord. Father, and I'm praying that you give them a special understanding, a deeper understanding, Lord, to be able to make the decisions, Lord, to line up with you, Father, to be in unity and be in wholeness with you, Father. Thank you for all that you do. Thank you for all that you are. This is in Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Alexandra, thank you very much. Would you join us in the pledge, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we move to public address today, I just want to make an opening statement and recommendation, Council, with regard to the tax rate, which is what we have on our agenda today. It will be my recommendation that we move toward the 40-cent rate. And I wanted to say that before we had any public comment, just so that there wouldn't be any confusion about where we're going, because I understand as we're learning how to do and progress through Senate Bill 2 and how it changes our timelines and our calendars to set our tax rates and our budget, I think we're learning on the go, and citizens are learning as they watch with us. So I just wanted you as a council to know that my recommendation will be that we go with the 40-cent tax rate, and we can have conversation about that. But before anybody made their their public address comments, I wanted to get that out there in front of everyone. So with that, we do have a citizen signed up for public address, so I'll pass the microphone to our moderator, Stephanie Coggins.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for participating in today's City Council meeting. Your input and your opinions are important to us, and we are glad that you're here to share them. At each posted meeting, we invite our fellow community members to address City Council regarding posted agenda items. Every speaker will have 3 minutes to address City Council. At the end of 2.5 minutes, you'll hear a warning beep, and we ask you to wrap up your thoughts and please stay within the 3 minutes allotted. Speakers are asked to limit your comments today to items on the posted agenda. And if you're here to speak on the public hearing that we have with item number 1, we would ask that you give us your comments either in public address or during the public hearing, but not both. This will help us to keep an accurate record of today's meeting. When you wish to speak, your decision is up to you. When you come to the microphone, please state your name and whether or not you live within City of Amarillo limits, and then let us know if you're speaking on, for, or against your agenda items. And with that, we have one speaker today signed up for public address, and that's Mr. James Skank.
Excuse me, before we get going, could you, this is barely on, could you restate what you just said at the first? We're going to what tax rate?
There's 2 proposals. One is 40 cents. That's the one that I would recommend.
Okay. Just be clear, because, it changes my whole comment to some degree.
Okay.
Because I was sort of confused about what we were trying to do, and I hope we consider what you're talking about here. I'll listen as I sit back down, because this has brought up such an ire about Senate Bill 2, as well as drawing out a lawsuit, drawing out a petition to pull back on this and letting the citizens vote. And some of the questionable statements, even here in the agenda, in reference to a 23.66% increase on property, raise taxes for maintenance and operation, and zero on maintenance and operation for 100,000 for people, but the rest was on INS. It's hard for us that try to follow it hard to keep up with these maneuvers. So I would appreciate the explanation as I sit down. Sometimes I sort of hear some other conversations that I wish we could just have. I think the Open Meetings Act would actually allow us to talk if you actually worked with the Open Meetings Act, but you refuse to. Just on simply, when you come out here right now and we're all looking dead head at a 49-cent property tax, and you mention you're recommending 40 cents now. Okay, let's talk. Let's get that out on the table, and I'd be interested in seeing where you come down, because this is the citizens that are concerned. So, wow. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Skank. That concludes public address, Mayor.
Thank you. Council, we will move then to item number 1, which is a public hearing on fiscal year 2022-2023 budget. Mr. City Manager?
Well, Mayor, we'll jump straight into presentation from Chief Financial Officer, Assistant City Manager Laura Storrs. Laura, are you going to make the presentation first?
Yes.
Okay. And then council will be able to ask questions on budget and tax rate as we go through.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. We have a very brief presentation to go over some highlights of your proposed 22-23 fiscal year budget. So what we want to highlight in this budget, first off, do want to mention that there were a lot of challenges in this year's budget. As you all are aware, we are seeing a large amount of inflation on everything that we buy. We're seeing an increased amount of utility costs. We're seeing an increased amount of fuel costs. And so all of that has been factored into this proposed 22-23 budget. But some things we wanted to highlight as some wins that we were able to achieve through this proposed budget is, first, we've been able to add in cash funding for a new fire station. So this would be in addition to the 13 fire stations we have. It would be a new one. With that, we have added in 15 additional firefighter positions to staff that new fire station. And we've also added in 1 new fire district chief. Along with that, we were able to put in 4 additional police officers, along with the vehicles and equipment that are needed with those new positions coming along. 2 of those will be utilized through the school districts, and the other 2 are additions to what we utilize here at the city. We also added in increased funding for neighborhood plans. That's been, we've seen some huge successes out of those, and so council was supportive of us putting some additional funding in for those neighborhood plans. Another thing we've been talking about a lot recently is the pressures on our solid waste department. And that's not just that department, it's all our departments, but solid waste has seen some challenges from a staffing standpoint. So in this proposed budget, we were able to put in additional pay adjustments to help us recruit new staff into those vacant positions and retain the staff that we do have. Also wanted to note that the increased funding that this council approved this past year for maintenance for our Parks and Rec department, that is still included in this proposed 22-23 budget. So with that, let's look at the expenditure side of the full city budget. So our 21-22 approved budget, which is the current year budget we're working on in right now, is $419.5 million. We increased that by $71.3 million to get to our proposed 22-23 fiscal year budget, which is $490.8 million. And again, things that we included in it was the initiatives for fire that we just covered, including a fire station and additional positions, additional police officers, the solid waste pay enhancements, parks and maintenance funding, and then also the increased costs that we are incurring related to utilities, fuel, and materials that we are purchasing, and that's all related to inflation. And there's a lot more in this budget than this, just that, but those are certainly some highlights as we move forward from the current year budget to the proposed budget for this next year. On the revenue side, we have in the current year $400.4 million in total revenue approved for the budget. We have identified $55 million in additional revenue to bring us to our 22-23 proposed revenue budget of $455.4 million. So with that, what we are needing council to do is to conduct a public hearing. That's what this item is for. So we will have a public hearing today on the budget. We are looking to do a public hearing on the tax rate on Thursday, this coming Thursday, September 8th. The other item, it's item 2 on your budget today, is to do a reading and record a vote for the ordinance for your proposed budget. And then on Thursday, Thursday, September 8th, we will have you do the second and final reading on the budget ordinance in order to approve it. And that will adopt your budget for fiscal year 22-23. Are there questions that I can answer? And I know that's a very high-level overview, but we went in depth, I know, over a 3-day period with all of you, and I know I've been sending some additional emails as well. So if y'all have any questions, I would be more than happy to answer those for you.
I don't think so.
So, Mayor, if I could just ask on
Yes.
the agenda, Ms. Storrs, the 40-cent tax rate works with our proposed budget because the 9-cent differential was on the INS side.
That is correct.
Okay.
Yes. And we'll go over, I can go over some of these postings in a little more detail here in a minute when we talk about taxes, because a lot of it's derived from property tax law. But what is posted for today is the tax rate that was proposed originally, which was the 49-cent one. And on that, if council decides to make a change, we can still fund this entire budget on that. We just will not utilize a piece for the INS side.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's a great question.
Just confirming that, are the revenues the same? Or would we have a different revenue number there?
So this revenue is, as it's proposed right now, at the 49-cent rate. If council takes action to go a different way, that revenue number will come down.
So the revenues would change, the budget alignment would not change.
That is correct.
You have money allocated appropriately on the 40 cents per the budget, but
Yes.
then the revenues change to what you just presented.
So the revenues, well, what I presented is all on the 49-cent tax rate. And so if council directs to go with the 40-cent tax rate that the mayor was speaking about earlier, you'll see my numbers change a little bit on Thursday. Everything was posted as of the 49 cents, but the revenue piece will come down, but your expense piece is going to stay the same because that's the best information we have at this point in time.
Okay.
Yeah.
And as we get to the tax rate item on the next item, we will give much more detail on the differences between how those two tax rates work, because we're going to give you options to consider.
And I can go over some of the postings too as well, because I know, I think as Mr. Skank mentioned, it's very confusing reading some of the wording on our notices, but those are all prescribed by state law. Brian and I have looked at these thoroughly, and some of them don't even make logical sense to a certain degree, but that is the way it is all prescribed in state law, so we are following that.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes? Other questions?
Thank you, Laura.
Thanks.
Okay, at this time, we'll open a public hearing on fiscal year 2022-2023 budget. Anyone who wishes to speak for, on, or against this item may have 3 minutes to do so. Is there anyone present who wishes to speak? Well, no, you had 3 minutes and you talked about it. Okay. Seeing no one, we will close this public hearing and entertain a motion. No action. Thank you, Laura. That habit right there. We will close the hearing and move to item number 2 on the agenda, which is consideration of ordinance number 8004. Okay. Mr. City Manager, with regard to ordinance number 8004. Do we have a presentation? Yes, here comes Laura.
Yes, ma'am.
So item 2 is the action piece related to item 1. Item 1 is the public hearing on the budget, and item 2 is the first reading of the ordinance adopting your proposed
So there's no
budget.
standalone presentation for item 2. That was really the presentation that was made in item 1.
For both, yes, if that makes sense.
So we will have a separate presentation for item 3, but right now, council can either ask questions of Laura to get more detail on the budget itself, get more information from feedback from the budget creation sessions that we had earlier, or they can make a motion to accept the budget as it is, understanding that with either tax rate, we will accomplish the budget as presented.
That is correct.
Do y'all mind sharing your thinking so we can all be a part of it?
Sorry, Mayor.
No, that's okay. I'm just thinking if y'all have questions that we need to discuss, maybe we should all do that together.
I think definitely the question that I asked Howard probably would get answered after her presentation. So my question was an ordinance.
On the ordinance that we're going to consider on item
Yes,
number
ma'am.
2.
So do you want to move forward with the prepresentation, and then we could come back to that, or would you like me to ask
I
my
think
question?
it's confusing the way this is laid out, and again, I know it's laid out in accordance to this budget statute, but
Vote on item 2 first.
we've already heard the presentation for item 2.
Okay.
It was the presentation for item 1, but it has to be listed as 2 different agenda items. So there's not going to be a new presentation with regard to the ordinance that we have to consider on item 2.
So if I could ask my question
Sure,
then
that would be
to our
great.
council. Ordinance 8004
Yes, sir.
specifically states the 49-cent rate, or is just the budget as proposed?
Just the budget as proposed. Ordinance 8005 is the
Right.
one that lays out the actual property tax
And the two
rate.
are not conjoined in any way.
So, yes and no. So the property tax rate is not stated in ordinance number 8004. It establishes your budget. And then you have to adopt a tax rate that then supports the budget that you just
So
voted on.
procedurally, we would be fine to move forward with the budget as presented, and then step up after that to an ordinance that wouldn't be 8005, would be a different ordinance than what's in my agenda, right?
It would be the same ordinance, but if you
Just a
all
different
decide,
amount.
yeah, you would just
Okay.
direct us to change the rate inside that ordinance. Yeah, they're both in draft form at this point. They were posted, I believe, along with the agenda. And the first one, 8004, is the really long one that has all the rates and fees and just the overall budget for the city. And then the 8005 is a lot shorter, and it's outlining the property tax rate. And that's the one, if you all decide on item 3 to go with a different rate, you'll direct Brian and I to mark up the changes in that ordinance, and we'll bring it back for second and final reading on
Okay.
Thursday. Yes.
Mayor, I think I'm caught up. I was just trying to make sure that I was seeing the steps.
It's certainly challenging.
In essence, what ends up happening is we're going to talk about the budget, which is in some ways is completely separate, even though it is a roundabout tied into interest and sinking. But this is mainly about maintenance and operation, really.
Yes, and so really you could adopt a budget and then whatever you think needs to be used to support it with a tax rate. That's why you have to do the budget first and then the tax rate second. So, because the budget, those are things you have to do, and then the tax rate is what you all determine you want to support in that budget.
So really, the budget is what we spent 4 days working on.
That is correct. We did.
And then you go back and you have whatever else to support that budget that comes in the tax rate.
That is
so really,
correct.
all we're doing is just saying we like the budget,
Yes.
and we want to move this budget forward.
That is correct. That is what item 2 is about. And Mayor, if I could pause for just a second, I forgot to mention, I wanted to thank Debbie Reed and Blair Snow and their team for all the work. This is months and months and months of work tied into a very short presentation, but appreciate all the work that they've done and all the work that all of our departments have done to bring this budget forward. It's a lot of work, and appreciate all the work that you guys put into it, because I know 3 days of listening to me talk about numbers can be mind-numbing. So appreciate you let me state that.
I don't think it's mind-numbing for Matt and Debbie and Blair. I mean, their faces kind of light up anytime you say budget. So. No, we do appreciate you guys very, very much. And we know that we ask the same questions over and over again because we're not living in it every single day. So thank y'all for your patience, as I know you fielded a lot of questions both during budget workshop and in individual meetings with all of us, too. We really appreciate your patience. Okay, so now get us back on track. Not that we were off track, but we're on agenda item number 2, which is ordinance number 8004 with regard to the budget. Do we have a motion with regard to this ordinance?
Yes, Mayor, we do. I move to adopt ordinance number 8004, which is the proposed budget, which reflects an increase in revenue derived from property tax revenues over last year's budget.
Second.
It's been moved by the Mayor Pro Tem and seconded by Councilmember Sauer to approve ordinance number 8004. Are there any questions or further discussion about that motion? Okay. Hearing none, all of those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? That passes with a 5-0 vote. Okay. Item 3 on our agenda is consideration of ordinance number 8005. Mr. City Manager.
All right, Mayor, we've got Laura Storrs, Chief Financial Officer and Assistant City Manager, to present the item. This is where we're going to discuss the different options on tax rate that are available to you. So I would ask that you just bear with us as we go through 2 different scenarios with supporting slides and graphs for each. Do feel free, though, to ask questions at any point during the presentation. Certainly we'll ask for questions at the end, and I'm sure there will be some. Laura?
Yes, and bear with me just a second as we're looking for the presentation, so I apologize on that. Jenny, it should say 2022 property tax information. Okay, no, you're just fine. So on this item, I'm going to try to clear a few things up for you guys and hopefully not confuse you more. But again, state law is very particular on how we post. Perfect, thank you. How we post in the newspaper, on our website, in the agendas, and even the motion language that you all have to utilize is all outlined in state law. And so appreciate your patience as we try to clear some of this up as we walk through, because especially on the property tax side, it can be very confusing on there. Okay, so on this first slide is where we are talking about kind of the effects that Senate Bill 2 had on the budget and property tax rate approval process. So this is all in Texas Tax Code Section 26. And what it outlines is that now there's this voter approval tax rate, and that is essentially a rate that allows for 3.5% more in revenue from the maintenance and operation side of the rate than the prior year. Your interest and sinking side, the side that supports debt, is allowed to fluctuate up and down as much as needed based on debt issuances that are outstanding. But the maintenance and operation side cannot rise higher than 3.5% above the prior year. Otherwise, it automatically has to go to an election, a voter approval tax rate election. Now, these changes also compressed our timeline for approving a budget. That's why we had earlier dates set in case council wanted to call an election. Since council decided not to, we were able to push the dates out a little further. And then also, it outlines what rate the city has to use if an election is not successful. And a lot of that we walked through this past year, but is not applicable necessarily for this year. So let's talk about just the operations and maintenance side of the rate. That is what I mentioned earlier on. Senate Bill 2 only allows it to go about 3.5% above the prior year, or you can't collect more than 3.5% in revenue above what the prior year rate was. Now, as you look at this slide, this starts some of the confusion because you see that the 21-22 approved maintenance and operation rate is 36.423 cents. But then our voter approval rate, the highest we can go on maintenance and operation this year, is 33.079 cents. So you do basic math in your head, that's a lower rate. But we're actually going to see increased estimated tax collections of about $750,000 from that. And that is due to the rise in appraised values that we saw this year. As you all know, PRAD is a separate third party that does those appraisals, and then they submit those to us and to all the taxing entities by July 25th each year. They certify them. Well, because we saw those appraised values go up, it takes a lower interest rate to still produce more revenue than last year. So we are capped on a maintenance and operations side of our rate at this 33.079 cents. And as I mentioned, it produces about $750,000 more than last year. And I just put a note on here just for frame of reference. Our budgeted increase for fuel alone is $577,000 for next year, and on utilities is about $1.2 million. So as I mentioned, we're seeing lots of pressure, same thing everyone is seeing in those rising costs, and just kind of outline that here. This next slide is the total property tax rate. So this is looking at the operation and maintenance side and the INS side. So I'm calling this option 1 on here because this is what the current proposed rate is set at. It is also equal to the voter approval tax rate. So the highest tax rate that this council could utilize without going to an election. Our current approved tax rate for 2021 is 44.334 cents. So the proposed tax rate that you all voted on August 2nd, and which is equal to our voter approval tax rate, that's the top end, it is 49.086 cents. What that means on a $100,000 home is that is about a $4 per month increase on a $100,000 home. For that, we would be able to achieve our current service levels. The public safety initiatives I went over a minute ago, which includes 4 police officers, a new fire station, plus the 15 firefighter positions to staff it. Also, 1 new fire district chief, continued park maintenance improvements and funding, athletic field lighting, city hall and civic center project funding, and more. That is what you would be able to achieve with the 49.086 cents. That is also what today's postings and what was posted in the newspaper, that's what all of those numbers are calculated on. So as you look on your agenda, when we did the public hearing on the budget, the revenue number is based off of this 49-cent number, this option 1, which is about $13.2 million more than last year from property tax revenue in total. So that's operations and maintenance and your INS side. So next slide here is option 2. So if we were to look at this same rate less the amount needed for the Civic Center project funding in this first year, we would be looking at a 40.628 cent rate. So what that means is our current tax rate is 44.334, and we would be looking to go to a 40.628 tax rate. What that means on a $100,000 home is it's actually a $3 per month decrease. So on that, we get the same current service levels, we get the public safety funding initiatives, park maintenance funding, athletic field lighting, and city hall. So there's only one piece that's not included in this option. I also wanted to state that not including that additional piece in this option does not change any action that council is taking at this point in time, and the items that are pending at this point in time. This has no bearing on that. So let's look at how this breaks down on a property tax rate, on the property tax bill in total. Now, all the taxing entities are going through this exact same process right now. They're doing public hearings, and they are adopting their tax rates. So what we show for you here is the 2021 tax rates on the entities versus the two options on the city's proposed tax rate for 2022. Now, again, some of the entities may be lowering their tax rates this year, some may be leaving them flat, some may be increasing them, depending on their situations. What this property tax bill is it shows you an example of a bill for someone in Amarillo Independent School Districts, Potter County, inside the city limits, and then also Amarillo College and the Water District are on here. We have 5 different school districts, 2 counties, and 2 different water districts. So these bills vary depending on where you live inside the city limits, but they're pretty close. They all run very similar within a few percentage points. So on this, it would have us as 19% of the total property tax bill. AISD would be about 45%, Potter County would be 28%, Amarillo College would be at 8%, and the water district's usually less than 1%. So this in total, us going from 44 cents to 49 cents is actually about it's a little less than a 2% increase on the total bill. The total bill, which is how taxpayers are actually billed. And again, there would be no effect or no increase to citizens over 65 because their taxes are frozen. So let's look at the second option here. This is the 40.628 option. So it changes the makeup of this bill just a little bit. And so on here, what this does, and I apologize, it didn't update on this copy, so I apologize. So the makeup of it, it's very similar. It puts the Amarillo ISD at 46%. Potter County still is at 28%. The city drops down to about 16%, and AC goes up to 9%. So it's very close. And again, these are all just estimated amounts based on what their rates were in the current year versus a proposed rate for us in the next year. So then we always like to see kind of where do we fall in similar sized cities across the state. Again, they are all doing this same thing right now. So we had to pull their values and their rates from the current year, and we are comparing it to our values and our proposed rates for this next year. So not a perfectly apples to apples comparison, but at least it shows you kind of where we fall. So the first one here is, again, on that 49.086 rate. You'll see that Amarillo is on the far right over there in green. So there are 3 cities that have a rate in 2021 lower than this 49-cent rate, and that's Fiscal, Plano, and Midland. There's an orange line going across this graph, and the orange line is the population. So again, we picked the 8 larger cities in Amarillo and the 8 smaller cities in Amarillo. So we try to pick as similar sized cities as we could. The average rate across all of these 17 cities is 57.215 cents. So still our 49-cent rate would be lower than that. So then we ran the same graph on the 40-cent tax rate. You'll see now we're second from the right, and that puts only Midland's 2021 tax rate lower than what we're looking at here. and all the other cities had a higher tax rate. This also then pulls down that average tax rate to 56.717 cents. And you'll notice on here, I had highlighted the cities that had a lower tax rate than us. So as we inlaid the the taxable values and the population figures on the next two slides, you could kind of see where those cities fell. So on this graph, what we do is we take the taxable values for each of these communities, and again, it was their 2021 taxable values. We multiplied it times their 2021 tax rates and divided it by their populations that were reported. And you get a tax revenue per capita. And so if you'll remember 2 graphs ago, Fiscal and Plano and Midland had lower tax rates than this 49-cent tax rate. And so you'll see now that Fiscal and Plano shifted well over to the right because they have a much higher tax revenue per capita. So that means they have a lot more tax money coming in per person in their areas. And that's driven by their taxable values and the amount of population, obviously, that they are supporting. Across these 17 cities, this is a $501, just almost $502 per capita number, with the city of Amarillo being just over $404 per capita. Now, this next graph is at the 40-cent tax rate, and if you'll remember, at the 40-cent tax rate, Midland was the only city that had a lower tax rate in 2021. You'll see that they shifted a little further over to the right. Amarillo is the second to lowest tax revenue per capita at this 40.628 tax rate, producing $334.69 per capita, with the average at around $497 per capita. And you'll see that Midland still is producing a larger amount per capita than the city, even with a lower tax rate, and that's due to their taxable values. So with that, let's talk a little bit about what comes next. So this, on item 3, there is a proposed ordinance for you there, and that is set at the rate that was voted on by council on August 2nd at the 49.086 cents. So council needs to take a vote on a tax rate. We've given 2 options here that will support the budget that was just voted on. So council can choose one of those tax rates or direct me on something different if they would like. And then what we will do is on September 8th, so this Thursday, we will have a public hearing at the start of that meeting. We will let citizens come and talk about the tax rate. And then we will do the second and final reading on the budget and the second and final reading on the tax rate. And then it will be followed by a vote to ratify the tax rate. So with that, are there questions that I can answer? Hopefully I maybe cleared up some of the confusion that on what was posted. Again, on some of the notices that we have to post on the public hearings or on the website, it talks about how much the rates have effectively changed. That comparison goes from a no new tax rate, which is where we have to go in and calculate a rate that could produce the exact same revenue as last year. So we have to take that rate and then compare it to what proposed rates you guys are looking at. That is the effective number that is calculated. But on maintenance and operations, if you go back, one of the postings says that on a $100,000 home, the tax rate will be raised by $0 on maintenance and operations. That's one of the postings that's out there. That's related to this slide right here. Remember, the approved maintenance and operating rate is actually higher than even the max maintenance and operating rate we can go to this next year. And that is all related to the growth in the appraised values. So that is why it talks about on a $100,000 home, maintenance and operations will be raised by $0. So that's certainly one of the confusing postings that's out there. Are there questions I can answer?
Okay, so Ms. Laura,
Yes, ma'am.
on option 2, on the what is the percentage decrease on the total tax bill? Is it still going to be 1.5%, or will it be a little more than that?
So on the total bill, it comes in just a little bit more. It's just right around that 1.5% in total. Yes.
Okay. And then I just have one other question. So when we voted on this in August, we did not have these options at the time. So what has changed since August?
So in August, when we were looking at the tax rate, we were looking at kind of the upper end, the highest tax rate that council could or might want to look at. So what we were talking about was the voter approval tax rate. So the voter approval tax rate takes into account that 3.5% increase for maintenance and operations, along with all the authorized debt that is currently outstanding that is backed by property taxes. So those numbers went through a large calculation that came out with the voter approval tax rate. So that was the high end. On August 2nd, all y'all were doing was just voting on the ceiling. So you didn't want to vote on a lower rate. You wanted to make sure and vote on the highest rate that you might possibly go up to allow you to actually approve anything below that. So since then, there's been discussions about funding of the Civic Center project with property taxes in this current year. And we, at this point in time, due to where we're at actually in the fiscal year, how much time has passed, we could take it out of the property tax rate for this first year and still allow the project to move forward if council, as long as everything is resolved. And then it would not go into the tax rate until the next year. So it would be on the 2023 property tax rate. And so a lot of it is a function of where we are, and we talked a little bit about this, I know, before, of where we are in the year in comparison to debt actually being outstanding. And that's what triggers that first debt service payment. So it is included in your voter approval tax rate because council did approve, and we still have an ordinance that is outstanding for that debt issuance. So it's still included in your budget, but because of timing, we could pull it out of your tax rate in this first year. So that's just an option that council could look at.
Council has directed the Civic Center project. As we currently forecast, we don't see any possibility of that project moving forward until such time that we could push that tax increase to October of 2023, just to get to that one specific item. So a 40-cent tax rate, 40 and change, will allow us to do everything that's in the budget.
That is correct.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Laura. That's all the questions I have.
I'm sorry, Frida.
No,
to step in.
No, I'm good. Thank you. That's all the questions I have. I appreciate that.
Yes, and
do you have something else?
I wanted just to add that the motion language, we put proposed motion language out there for all of y'all to see. And we gave you options based on these two options. And it has to follow exactly what state law says.
Right.
And I know on especially the 40-cent one, it's very confusing because it talks about it's an increase to the tax rate at 40 cents. And you're looking at, wait, our tax rate is 44 cents. If we're going to a 40-cent tax rate, how is that an increase? The way it is an increase is state law, again, makes you go back and calculate a no new revenue rate. And that's a rate that could produce the exact same revenue as the prior year. That rate is 39.6 cents, so just slightly lower than this 40-cent tax rate. And so in the motion language, that is the comparison that it is speaking to. It's not speaking to the approved rate to a proposed rate. It's the no new revenue rate to the proposed rate. So
thank you, and I appreciate that. And I did realize that. So,
oh, okay, great.
So I appreciate that.
Wonderful.
Councilman Sauer, do you have any questions?
No, ma'am, I don't.
Okay. Councilman Stanley, questions?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Councilman Smith? Okay, I have a few questions. Looking at this slide right here, we have that note down in the yellow about at least a few increases in the budget for this year. I'm just wondering, how is inflation impacting our budget this year?
So inflation, I think we covered that with you guys. Day one of the budget review is inflation was coming in a little over 9%. So it is having a massive effect on our budget. And so what that has translated to is our departments have had to relook at rates and fees to ensure that they are keeping up as much as possible. Actually, most of our departments kept it slightly belower than some of the inflation factors that we're seeing, but we are being hit in every line item of our budget, just like any business, but especially in all of our construction costs are going up significantly, but the fuel factor that's included in our utilities, it's affecting those. And then there's a lot of pressures in the employment market right now, just because of the low employment rate in our community and just the pressures between businesses to try to get staffed. So we are continuing to see staffing shortages along with high inflation on our overall budget. Mayor, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you. I just want citizens to know that inflation is impacting the city as well as all of our personal business and household budgets. I had a question also about if we could move to the tax rate comparison, Jenny.
Which one are you thinking, Mayor?
Yeah, either really the one that's 40 cent.
Okay.
Talking about the dollar bill?
Nope.
Okay.
I'm talking about the color,
Oh, comparison
the
cities,
rainbow
gotcha.
bar graph.
The cities.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, one more. There you go.
There you go.
Okay.
So that is comparing their last year rate to our this year rate. Talk just a little bit specifically about why does that matter? I mean, this is the best we can produce right now because they're in the process, so we can't use their 2022 apples to compare to our 2022 apple. We have to use their 2021 apples to compare to our 2022 apples.
Absolutely.
How do you think that affects what's on this chart?
Well, and I wanted to flip two more over because I think on the per capita one, you're going to see it a lot more. We saw growth in appraised values at, I don't know that I want to say record levels, but at very high levels across the entire state. This graph here has our increase in those appraised values and does not have their increases in their appraised values. I would wager that every single one of these cities on this graph saw a large increase in their appraised values from 2021 to 2022. We didn't have that number because those haven't been produced yet, or they probably have them internally, but it hasn't been pushed out necessarily where we can get a hold of those. But we still, with our appraised values going up almost 12% overall in the city, we are still at this lower point in comparison to their values that we haven't even seen what the growth rate is on those. Now, something that I have seen on a lot of cities, I have seen some cities are looking, because of Senate Bill 2, they're going to have to lower their tax rate. But keep in mind, if any of these cities did some debt issuances this past year, even with the maintenance and operating piece going down, their INS side may be going up. So they may be staying close to where they are or potentially going up from where they are. It's going to be a unique year to see the changes coming forward. But again, this is the best snapshot in time that we can say, here's our information and here's what we can see that's readily produced by all these other cities that are similar sized.
Do you project that once we have that information and we can update 2022 numbers to our 2022 numbers, what will happen to Amarillo? Will it move left or further right on that graph?
I would say it's going to stay very close to where it's at. I think there's going to be some shifting between some of the cities. We normally are on the very far right. So we are normally the lowest on this graph. So I was a little surprised to see that we were up just slightly, but I don't know that it'll stay that way once we get those final appraised values in and the tax rates that these entities adopt. But we can certainly do that once those get published. They will all have to be by the end of this month, and so we can work on getting that updated and out to council.
Okay.
Or we could do an update in a council meeting if needed.
Yeah, Mr. City Manager, I would like to request that we see that chart updated in the next 60 days or whenever we think that information is available.
We can do it as soon as we have all the tax rates for these cities, and they will all be approving tax rates within the next few
By
weeks.
September 30th,
Yes, ma'am.
yes.
And then I'd like to back up 2 more slides. It's small, and so I'm not sure that everyone sitting in the room can see it all. But I'm wondering, Laura, with our rate at 40 cents, that puts us at the second lowest tax rate out of these 17 cities. Lubbock is just off of center. And can you read what their tax rate is? With our tax rate at 40 cents, what is Lubbock's tax rate?
Lubbock's tax rate for 2021 was 52.323 cents.
So I just think that is good for us as a council to keep in mind. I mean, I think our best comparison city, our best sister city to compare costs of operation, similar economies, similar revenue situations, is truly Lubbock. And you can see the differential there between our tax rate and Lubbock's tax rate. And then the average, Laura, it's little print, but the average tax rate for those 17 cities is what?
It's 56.717 cents.
Okay, so, we are clearly below average for our peer group of 8 larger cities and 8 smaller cities. I think those are important things to point out in making our decisions about tax rate.
Mayor, if I could, go ahead, Eddie, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to make a comment and perhaps ask on the next graph, could we see any of these other cities if they are, do they have a junior college that is supported by property tax? So my comment would be, I think we do more with less. So yes, you can say apples to apples with Lubbock, but I think our management actually stretches our dollars more so because competitively, we're really, even at 40 cents, we're at what? What's Amarillo College's tax rate? 9 cents?
20? No, it's 20.
Oh, it's 20 cents.
Let me think here.
It's 9%,
Right at that.
right?
It's about 19.
So if I'm just looking at my tax bill personally, whether I live in Amarillo or I live in Lubbock, I don't pay taxes for a junior college in Lubbock.
Correct.
So
Yep.
so my taxes may be comparable, and we're wanting to compete, in apples to apples with other cities. But I think for our staff and for what we do as a community, we prioritize that junior college. We pay for that. But then we also take our services further than I think they have to. And so I'm not advocating for or against anything like that. I'm just drawing an attention to that. The chart is a good chart for reference, but unless we put in there these other cities and do they have junior colleges, I don't really think it's a fair comparison. I think we do a better job than what we're reflecting.
So my statement's going to even support that even more so.
Okay, I'll pause for just a sec. I'm maybe not understanding what you're saying because everything listed here, I just want to clarify, is a city tax rate.
City
Nobody's
only.
junior college rates are reflected in this bar graph. So I
correct.
think you're bringing up total tax rate,
I am.
but I just want to clarify, everything on this chart is city tax rates only. So Lubbock has a city tax rate last year of 52 cents. This year we're discussing a city tax rate of 40 cents. And that's the gap that I wanted to highlight. What the counties do, what the school districts do, whether or not they have a junior college, that's part of their overall community tax rate. But this chart is just showing city to city.
Yes.
Am I understanding
That
that
is
correctly?
correct. And as similar, we are all providing somewhat similar services. It may not look and feel exactly the same, I think, to Mr. Stanley's standpoint, but we're doing essentially the same things with each of these tax rates across Texas. So, yes, and we've discussed internally a lot about trying to produce maybe a graph with total tax bills, because I do agree with you. I think that's what our citizens see are the total tax bills. The challenge is we alone are hard because we have the 5 school districts, the 2 counties, and then the city. You know, some have junior colleges, some don't. And it's been a little bit challenging to truly pull that total tax bill comparison. So we can continue to work on that. I think it's just we've run into some roadblocks over the years on that, because I do agree with you. That is what our citizens see, which is where we try to explain more in this graphic here, is that we're only a portion of that total bill that they're seeing. But when you look at what other cities are doing, they're using these rates compared to the lower rate that we're using to essentially do some of the same services.
Okay.
Councilman Sauer.
So mine's going to be a little bit different than that I think we really do have to talk about, because it does go back to what Councilman Stanley is saying about how well we take care of our money. The first thing would be on this one, if you look at what Mesquite's rate is, Brownsville's rate,
Yes.
70 cents.
Yes.
Okay, and then go down here and look at what Frisco's rate and Plano, which are the 2 above us.
Yes.
They've got a 44.6 rate. So whenever you go to the next slide, you'll find out. So we've stayed at the low end on both of these.
Yeah.
And when you look at the next slide, and then you come to the realization that somebody has a high rate, they have very low property values, they end up being very low, 297. Whenever they have a low tax rate, they typically have very high property values,
Yes.
which ends up being Frisco and Plano, who then become the top 2.
Yes.
And look at where we move on there. We have low tax rate and we have low property values, so we do a heck of a lot more with our dollars than any other city in the state of Texas.
I think that's a great point, because there's 2 pieces of that. And you can see how cities utilize those 2 pieces in different ways. However, historically and still currently, we're still at that lower tax rate, and lower appraised values in comparison to the rest of the state.
Truly,
Yeah,
the other 3 cities, they're normal. We're very much an outlier.
we are.
We're very much an outlier.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for taking time to answer those questions, Laura.
Yes.
Any other questions? This side? No? Okay. At this time, then, we can entertain a motion on agenda item number 3 with regard to ordinance number 8005.
Mayor, I move to adopt ordinance number 8005, that the property tax rate be increased by the adoption of a tax rate of 0.40628, which is effectively a 2.3% increase in the tax rate.
Second.
It's been moved by Mayor Pro Tem Powell and seconded by Councilmember Sauer to approve ordinance number 8005. Any questions or further discussion about that motion? Okay, hearing none. We do have to do this as a rolling roll call vote. So if you don't mind, I'll just call you out. I think we can do it by raised hands. Is that right, Steph? Okay, so all of those in favor of the motion, would you please raise your hand? Okay, that's 5 votes for the motion and none opposed. And that brings us to the end of our agenda today, Council. I appreciate your time here and all the time that you spend learning about the budget and serving on the council. Thank you for arranging your schedules to be at this special called meeting and the one on Thursday. We'll see you then. We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.